Welcome back to the Winter Growers Podcast. Today, my guest is Vivian Glover of Gemusegarten in Hoxhohl, Germany. Since Vivian was 2 years old when her grandfather carved her a toy farm out of wood, she's always known she wanted to become a farmer. After studying organic farming and marketing in school and working on other farms for many years, she started her own farm in southern Germany in 2016. With just under an acre of production, as a no-dig market garden, Vivian supplies 180 member CSA, with 90 of those members year-round. Currently, she has 2 unheated high tunnels and focuses on efficient production using intercropping techniques and low-tech vegetable storage solutions. Vivian also farms as a single mom, so I really appreciate her openness, knowledge, commitment, and heart, speaking about her experiences and challenges as a year-round grower. Today's episode of the Winter Growers Podcast is brought to you by Tunnel Vision Hoops. Tunnel Vision Hoops designs and manufactures do-it-yourself high tunnels, hoop houses, and greenhouses. With an extensive array of products to help large and small growers become more productive, they have 11 different tunnel widths to fit any application and designs to stand up to weather conditions from coast to coast. Tunnel Vision is also a national distributor of parts and accessories needed to build, maintain, or upgrade an existing tunnel or hoop house. Check out their Tunnel Vision Hoops YouTube channel for instructional how-to videos to help build a great high tunnel or hoop house. Here at Four Season Farm, we have 2 movable high tunnels made by Tunnel Vision Hoops, and they are definitely my favorites. To learn more, visit their website at tunnelvisionhoops.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Growing for Market magazine. Which crops will pay back your investment in a hoop house or greenhouse? How does managing a greenhouse through the winter differ from summer growing? And which crops can just be overwintered in the field? Learn all that and more by subscribing to Growing for Market magazine. The writers are farmers, not journalists. They won't tell you how to grow, they'll tell you how they grow, so you can decide what works for your farm. Growing for Market is celebrating 30 years of helping local food and flower growers succeed with articles written by experienced farmers from around North America. Since 1992, Growing for Market is by farmers, for farmers. Plus, subscriptions start at only $30 per year. Whether you do farmers markets, local wholesaling, a CSA, or dream of starting a farm, check them out today at growingformarket.com. Request a free sample print or digital copy from their website, and podcast listeners can get a new subscriber discount of 25% off with the code WINTER when subscribing at growingformarket.com. I think Growing for Market magazine is an excellent and affordable resource for any grower. Now, back to the show. So welcome, Vivian. Today I have Vivian Glover from Gemusegarten in Hoxhohl, Germany. I apologize if I butchered any of that at all, but I'm so excited to have you here today. It's really interesting for me to head to Northern Europe and speak with some farmers who are, might be in a little bit more mild climate than us here in the northeast of New England, but you are at the further northern latitudes, and that doesn't make it more challenging with winter growing. So thank you for being here today, Vivian.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love this podcast so much, and I'm very honored to be on there myself now.
Well, wonderful. Well, as I was saying, I'm really curious about, to speak with farmers in Northern Europe. And I'd love to get started with hearing a little bit about your farming story, your background, where you grew up, how you got into farming, and especially winter farming.
Okay, I just grew up round the corner here, about 4 kilometers from where I farm now. So when I was about 2 or 3 years old, my granddad built me a wooden farm for playing with. And I just absolutely loved that. And I suppose that was when I decided to become a farmer. My parents both weren't in farming or anything like that. So I'm a first generation farmer myself, which still is quite unusual here in Germany. There aren't all that many. Most of them just take on the farm that their parents had. So I knew quite early on that I wouldn't want to do conventional farming, but luckily enough, we've got 2 universities here in Germany where you can go and study organic farming, and that is what I then did. I was at a University for Applied Sciences near Berlin and studied organic farming and marketing. And then after that, I worked at a big biodynamic farm quite close to here, actually, and set up and managed their farm, shop, and cafe for something like 7 years. But I always had the goal to have my own farm one day. My goal was when I turn 30, I want to have my own farm. And I actually managed. I was 29 and a quarter when I registered my farm. So I was at that biodynamic farm from 2010 to 2017. And already in 2015, I started planning for my own business, my own farm business. And it took, nearly 2 years. But then I started off part-time first. I carried on working that large farm. But it soon showed that interest was so high, so many people wanted to have one of my CSA shares that I could switch to being a full-time farmer within half a year, that was. So ever since, I've been farming full-time on my own farm. And seeing that I didn't come from a farm, I had to find somewhere to farm, actually. And buying a whole farmstead was just not feasible because it's just real estate is so expensive here. So I knew quite early on already when I was studying that if I wanted to have my own farm one day, I would have to start with something that didn't need much space. So growing vegetables was the best option, more or less. And I used to grow vegetables in all my kitchen gardens and did that like John Jevons used to do it, or still does it. I mean, Ecology Action and all those people still do it. And thought, well, why can't I just do that only on a bigger area? And then I started looking around and just happened to come across one of Jean-Martin Fortier's first videos on YouTube. I think it was something like this: 6-figure farming, how to earn 100,000 Canadian dollars with a market garden, and realized that actually other people had already done that, had just taken a very manual way of growing vegetables and transferred that to a bit of larger growing area, not only a kitchen garden. So that is where I started, and that was in 2017 then. And I was able to buy a piece of land quite close to where I live. So I just started with a field that was about 2 acres in size, and there was nothing on there. We didn't have any electricity. We didn't have water. We didn't even have a fence. It was just a blank slate that I started with. And now we've got solar panels on the roof of our barn, and we've got a well, and we've got a fence, and we grow veg for something like 90 households year round, and another additional 90 households in summer.
That's great. So I guess what I'm really curious about is, growing up in Germany, what were the influences like? I mean, did your parents have gardens? How, for the university, how common is it for students to go into agriculture? I mean, I'm just really curious about the culture, and if you could sort of describe that a little bit in comparison or in contrast to a lot of the U.S.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a village of about 800 inhabitants, so it's quite small for here. And I used to help there at a farmer's, and I was allowed to look after the calves and feed the horses and do things like that whilst I was a child. But actually then becoming a farmer is quite unusual. And my mentor farmer in that village there always said, never, don't become a farmer. Don't do that. That's the worst profession you can have. And there's no future in it at all. And these days, he's so proud of me. It's so sweet that I actually did it and that I'm successful as well. So, I mean, both of my parents haven't got a farming background. Nobody in my family really has. But going to the university is usually the way that people that want to go into farming and don't come from a farming background and that plan to have farms someday, that's the path that they choose, because it prepares you quite well for everything. You also learn a lot about marketing and keeping books and stuff like that. And if you plan to work on a farm, you don't usually go to university. You do an apprenticeship here. You do a 3-year apprenticeship. And that's if you want to work on a farm someday. But if you want to run a farm yourself, most people do go to university.
And did you actually learn about any winter growing at university? Was that part of the coursework, or did you learn about that afterwards?
No, we did do some practical stuff there. The one semester was a practical semester. So we had to spend a couple of months on a farm, and also to be admitted to university, you had to show that you'd been working on a farm for at least, I don't know what it was, something like 3 months or something like that. So it wasn't all theoretically. And going to the University of Applied Sciences also meant that it was much more hands-on than if I would have gone to just a normal university, where the aim is to have the students work in science one day, not necessarily running their own farm. But that it being a University of Applied Sciences actually did help by also learning a lot of other things. I mean, we went out and we looked at plants, and I know how to tell you what kind of plant that is and how to look it up. I know what different kinds of ground and soils there are. We did all of that. We did all the basics, scientific basics, but we also did a lot of hands-on.
And the specifics too, like, learning about light levels and temperature limits for crops and the specific crops you can grow. I mean, did you get a lot of that in textbooks? Did you get that practically? How did you learn that? Or did you learn that in university?
Well, for one, the university had a huge library where we had a lot of books. And it didn't only, you can't only learn organic farming there, but also all kinds of related studies. And that means that the library also contained a lot of books on forestry, on ecology, on nature conservation and things like that. So there was a lot to read. And I did spend a lot of time in the library. But all the horticultural stuff, I really only learned afterwards. A lot of things I learned by doing, by asking colleagues, by buying special books, horticultural books, and trying out.
Yeah. No, I just think it's fascinating that, considering this is something that probably has been to some degree done for centuries, right? Growing some crops year round, right? In Northern Europe. But then the actual information about how to do it is still difficult to find. And I just find it fascinating about how that transfer of knowledge happens. And it sounds like it is a lot about doing it, trial and error. Experimenting and figuring it out as you go, which is really interesting because that's been a lot of winter growing here in the US too. It's trial and error.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that also has to do with it being so specific to your own site.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, I mean, just imagine if you've got high trees right next to your site, that means your winter climate is totally different than when it's all open to the wind, for example. But on the other hand, you have less light, especially in the middle of winter. But probably your frosts, your coldest temperatures won't be as low as if it was all open. So it's so site specific. I think the only thing that one can really learn are all the general things, and then one has to sit down and do one's homework.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your climate at your farm site. What are I actually have a good little cheat sheet here for Celsius to Fahrenheit. So I can hopefully interpret a little bit. But what are your average lows and highs through the winter and in the summer? Just the layout of what your growing climate is like at your farm.
Yeah. Well, in winter, it's usually our daytime temperatures are usually somewhere between -2 and +5 degrees. And
okay, so hold on. That is -2 is 28 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, so just around about freezing.
Yep.
Usually a bit above freezing. But it can go down up to -13 where we are.
Okay, which is about 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Yep.
Yeah, and we usually have about a week of temperatures like that, 1 or 2 weeks every winter, where just more or less everything comes to a halt because we can't do anything there then.
Yeah.
And in summer, usually we've got temperatures, well, say in the middle of summer, we've usually got temperatures from about 25 to 32 degrees or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, but sometimes it can be hotter, but that's quite unusual. So that's the range of temperatures that we usually get, and somewhere in between. We've got 4 seasons, actually. We've got spring, summer, autumn, and winter. I mean, that's not like that everywhere. They're quite well defined, although I get the feeling that spring and autumn are getting less all the time.
Yeah.
And it's more or less only summer and winter.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're on a hillside, and quite a severe hillside as well, something like 10 degrees. So we've got quite a high solar gain where we are, because it's the hillside is towards the southwest. So we get a lot of sun. When the sun is out, we do get a lot of sun, which also means that the soil dries off earlier in spring and warms up earlier in spring and usually cools down later in autumn. But on the other hand, in the middle of summer, it can also mean that it can really be very hot where we are. And we've actually had that just transplants that they didn't dry up because we didn't water them enough, but because just the sun was just pouring down so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen pictures on your Instagram of your farm, and it's quite beautiful. I mean, it's really very picturesque, sort of nestled in this, the slope, and you've got all the trees and some hills around. It's very beautiful. So I've loved looking through those photos of your farm. And I also looked up that you are at almost the 50th parallel, 49.75. So you are definitely up there in terms of low light levels in the winter and quite a bit of light in the summer.
Yeah.
So how do you notice those differences, or with your timing of crop planting and everything, that you have to be very specific?
Well, yeah, especially when planting winter crops, I always get the feeling we've got one chance of planting them. If we miss that chance, that's it then for the whole of winter. We've got another chance next year then. And otherwise, I mean, all our beds are orientated east-west to maximize light in winter. And also our polytunnels are orientated east-west. And at the moment, I mean, the sun is really low at the moment. We didn't have much sun in the past couple of weeks in any case, but even our our raised beds cast a shadow right over the path, touching the edge of the next bed. So that's how low the sun gets in winter here. And light levels start to rapidly decline as from about beginning of November, and then as from December, plant growth just stagnates more or less until Valentine's Day usually. That's when everything picks up again.
That's funny that you talk about the actual raised bed being the shade from low light levels. I'm used to more of like, adjacent high tunnels being, the shade, and have to be concerned about where the placement is in the winter. But you can't do much about other raised beds.
No.
So you talked about high tunnels or polytunnels. How many do you have, and how, essential are they to your winter growing?
Yeah, well, at the moment we've got 2 polytunnels. I looked it up. It's probably 20 feet in width and 60 feet long.
Okay.
Each of them. And I'm just in the process of ordering another 1 or 2 because they're definitely essential for what we do, because otherwise we couldn't have any fresh greens in winter. I mean, we've got some kinds of, some of our crops grow outside all year round or in winter as well. But especially all the salad greens, we can only grow them in the polytunnel, not necessarily because of the temperatures, but more because of all the moisture, because we've got weeks in winter, also weeks on end where it doesn't dry off, where it's not, and then you just get problems with all fungal diseases and all that. Yeah. So you've got 2 currently, and then what is your, can you give us a description of what is growing? It's January now when we're recording this. What's growing in the high tunnels right now, and what's out in the field? And then also, what do you have in storage? Yeah, well, in the high tunnels, we've got mustard greens, claytonia, endives, what else? Arugula, buckthorn plantain.
Which is minutina, just for anyone who's curious. We call it minutina.
Okay, I didn't know that. And I think that's it, more or less. Oh, spinach, of course. Spinach, yes.
Yeah.
Winter workhorse. Yes. And outdoors, we're still growing leeks and Brussels sprouts and Savoy cabbage and kale, and also a bit of claytonia and a bit of spinach as well, but that's not all that much. And then in storage, we've got ball-headed cabbage, red and white, and celeriac, and carrots, and parsnips. Oh, yeah, parsnips and carrots we've got outside this year as well, and carrots in storage as well. And then what else is it? Carrots, I think that's more. Oh, yeah, and then kohlrabi. You get these huge kohlrabis. Certain varieties grow up to several kilograms each.
Yeah, they look like heads, human heads.
Definitely. They're not really pretty, but they keep well and they taste nice in the middle of winter. And we've got those in storage as well. And that's more or less it. The pumpkins or the winter squash, we've just dished out the last of them, because they didn't keep well this winter after the wet summer that we had. We had a very wet and cold summer last year. So we had lots of problems with fungal diseases. And that means that things in storage are keeping less well than we're used to. And we've got onions in storage and the last of the garlic. And also that garlic, we've had a lot of problems with just rot in storage this year.
Do you, just back to the kohlrabi, the storage variety, is that called Cossack or Cossack? Is that the variety name that you grow by any chance?
No, it's Super Schmelz.
Oh, okay.
It's a German variety. And you can gain up to 9 kilograms in weight. I'm not sure what that would be in pounds, but something like 4.5, I suppose.
Yeah. No, they're huge. It's the variety we have
18.
here. Yes,
18.
I was going to say, because it's
Double.
2.2,
Yeah.
right? Kilos per pound. The Cossack variety that we've grown here, we don't grow it currently as much. We were growing it as like a animal, feed for chickens, because you could just slice them in half and then put them out, and the chickens would, eat the insides, and it would just be the skin. It was like a basketball, skin left. We tried selling them to people, but it was a hard sell sometimes because they're so massive and huge. People were intimidated by them. Do you find that they're more accepted in Germany or with your customers?
Yeah, I've heard that in the States or North America, Kohlrabi isn't as popular as it is here. Here, it's a really popular vegetable. You get it year round, and we've had it for years, and everybody knows what to do with it. And we eat it raw and cooked and fried and everything. And I've heard that in the North America, you've only had that for a couple of years now, haven't you? Only picking up now.
And it's still a hard sell. I mean, we don't currently grow it because it's a hard sell, but it definitely stores well. And it's wonderful to have those crops that store well. I'd like to hear you describe your storage system. You don't use a traditional CoolBot or a cooler. You have a really low-tech storage. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. We just built a hut and insulated it, or not we, my father did. My father does all the building. I'm so glad to have him for that. And so he just built a hut and insulated it. And we've just got pallets in there. And then I'm not quite sure what you call them, but those, you can put them onto the pallets. You just stack them on top of the pallets. That's just like a piece of wood that goes round with hinges in the corners. And you can fold them up in summer when you don't need them and just take them out. And then we can have that room as a cool room if we need to. And we just keep it in there and try and keep the temperature below 10 and above 0.
All passively, just from opening a vent, or how do you keep it cool in there?
Yeah, just opening the door and cooling it down. I mean, we have to make sure that the mice stay out. Otherwise, we won't have all that much from our storage crops. But that has worked very well for the past couple of years now. And we've done that this hut that I was just talking about, we only built that last summer. Before that, we just rented storage place somewhere else and brought all the vegetable there. But we just did it the same way. And that worked really well for the first couple of years. But now we're going to install, something like a CoolBot. We're not going to buy a CoolBot. My dad is just going to wire one up himself, more or less, which is really easy. I mean, what's his name? Jared Regier from Vegetable Academy. Do you happen to know him?
I don't know.
I think he used his videos and Instagram content that he posts is more for home growers or homesteaders, but it's quite interesting. And he just put up a video on YouTube a couple of weeks ago where he explains how he builds a CoolBot himself.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So that is what we're going to do, and also have an air conditioning unit to be able to keep the temperature more stable. I mean, it's worked fine for the past couple of years, but it'll be easier that way, nevertheless.
Yes, definitely. I'd also like to hear a little bit more about the interplanting techniques that you use on your farm. You have, limited bed space, and so you're really keen on interplanting. And what would that look like, say, going into the winter months, for instance? Do you do it specifically into the winter, or is it more of a spring-summer process?
Well, we interplant whenever possible, just to utilize space as efficiently as possible, because just as you said, I mean, it's not that we wouldn't have the room to expand and have more growing space, but I find the more compact a market garden is, the better you can look after everything, because you tend to keep, let's say the other way around. If it's too big, you tend to just overlook corners and everything. So I try and keep it as compact as possible, but not only for management, but also to just keep the ground covered as much as possible and to have as much diversity as possible growing there and photosynthesizing. So what I do, or what I like doing, is in summer I like interplanting lettuces in all the brassicas or the cabbage at least, which also has the added benefit that it keeps away pests. I'm not sure about the English name, but that little beetle that tends to eat holes into the brassicas leaves.
Flea beetles, I believe.
Oh, yeah, flea beetle, yeah. Yeah, I found that planting lettuce in between cabbage keeps away the flea beetle. We don't have to do anything against it anymore, and that's very good. Because I hate row covers. It's just such a hassle, and whenever possible, I try and not use them. So that's a very good strategy. And I like planting lettuce in between leeks because they just take ages before they fill in the space that they need later on. So I've got 3 rows of leeks on one bed and 2 rows of lettuce in between. So that's just added value on the same space. And then it really comes in when I start transforming from summer crops, especially in the polytunnel, to winter crops. Because, I mean, we all want tomatoes as long as possible. And it's always so sad to take out the plants. So what we've been doing the past couple of years is just defoliating them from below. I mean, we do that all summer in any case, but then at the end we do a really hard prune, and that lets a lot more light into the tunnel and right down onto the soil. And then I just sow mustard greens and plant all the winter crops and can keep the tomatoes in for another 2 or 3 or even 4 weeks whilst they start growing, whilst they start establishing themselves. And then I cut out the tomatoes or the cucumbers as well. And that's usually also the point when light levels are getting lower, and then the winter crops are happy about the extra light that they then get. So I try and time taking the tomatoes out so that they don't elongate too much the crops that are growing underneath. Because, I mean, when I want to cut them in winter several times, it's important that what's it called? The part between the root and where the leaves start, the internodium? No.
I think so. Yeah. You might know more than me on the botanical terms.
Well, yeah. If that's too long, it's difficult to cut. For example, mustard greens, it's difficult to cut them several times because you then just, if you cut too low, they won't grow back again.
Yeah. So I find the interplanting really interesting because, I mean, especially for a small farm, I mean, I love how you talk about keeping the soil covered as much as possible. And that's one method for doing that. But, you know, for us, since we have movable polytunnels, high tunnels, we aren't feel as compelled to have to interplant because we can maximize our space by moving the tunnel from one location to the next. But I understand that someone who doesn't have a movable or has limited space, it really makes a lot of sense to interplant. Yeah. And so I'm always, curious to hear more about those techniques that farmers use, especially going into the winter months too. Yeah, and I mean, especially our polytunnel space is tiny compared to the amount of CSA shares that we produce during winter. So we really have to maximize it as much as possible. And it's not necessarily that polytunnels are so expensive. I mean, it's here similar to the US. Within one season, you've just got the money back in that you spent for the polytunnel without any problem. But it's also, I mean, before you were talking about how beautiful our setting is, and that's also one thing I want to keep it as beautiful. And putting up loads of polytunnels will destroy that one day. I mean, I just said before, I'm just in the process of ordering another one or two. But yeah, it's always, I'm not sure whether it's a good idea
to preserve for preserving the beauty, but polytunnels also create a good working environment in winter. And that's one thing. The more employees I have, the more I have to look out for something like that. Because for one, I need constant work for them during winter. And for two, spending time outside in a storm harvesting veg is necessary sometimes, but you don't have to overdo it. And then being able to go back into the polytunnel and spending a couple of hours in the calm and dry, that makes my whole work surroundings much more attractive.
Yeah, for sure. How many employees do you have, and how many do you have summer versus winter? What does that look like?
Well, I keep them all year round because I grow all year round. So that's possible because of that. And well, I've got one part-time employee, although it's almost full-time. But in summer, she works a bit more. And in winter, she works a bit less. But she's there all year round. And then I've got one apprentice who's just doing the 3-year apprenticeship for horticulture. And then I've got one woman that just comes twice a week to just help with the 2 big harvests that we've got. And then it's me, but I only do it part-time these days because I've got a child. So that's quite difficult sometimes to keep everything running and only be there part-time, more or less.
Yeah. How old is your child?
He's 3.5, nearly 3.5 now.
Yeah. That's hands-on.
Definitely.
And do you find, are you able to bring him out into the work environment? Do you have childcare? I mean, how do you manage that? I believe you said you're a single mom, so that, is an added effort to raise your child and farm at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, he's been going to kindergarten now since September, but due to COVID, we've had some weeks where the kindergarten has been closed now. But luckily enough, my parents only live around the corner, a couple of kilometers from here, and my mother's pensioned off. My father is too, but he can't stop working. And so they look after him, I think, twice a week, and his father takes him twice a week. So that leaves me with 4 days a week, or 3 days, 4 days for me to work in the garden and 1/2 day for me to work in the garden. And that just has to be enough. And because he loves it there. He loves going there, and he's got a swing there, and he loves digging around in the ground, and he's got a wheelbarrow and all his tools and everything, and playthings and all that stuff. But after an hour, he just gets fed up, and then he wants me, and he wants my attention, and he doesn't understand why I'm in the far corner of the field and why I have to do something there. And I mean, that's been like that more or less from the start. I always had this vision. I think a lot of vegetable growers have this vision. You have a child and you just put it on your back and carry on like you did before. Well, that works for an hour or two. And if you're lucky, then the child falls asleep. But after an hour or two of hoeing, the child is fed up with this position hanging on your back and just wakes up and doesn't want to cooperate anymore. And then you have to go back home with the child and leave the weeds where they are.
Yes, no, it is very, very challenging. I mean, I remember when both my boys were little, and I'm always, so fascinated with, moms these days and how to incorporate it, how to find boundaries, how to, it's so challenging. And there really is no one right way or any easy way to do it. It's really a process, that everyone is figuring out as they go. So
last season you had Taylor from Footprint Farm on your podcast, or the season before, I'm not quite sure. And I can so relate with what she was talking about, having a child. And it's just like that. You can't expect the child to just go along with everything what you do. I mean, it doesn't understand that. It's a baby and it has its needs, and it gets a feeling that you can't satisfy its needs if you're hoeing, for example.
Yeah, no, it's challenging for sure. Hey, podcast listeners, we're going to pause for a moment to hear from one of our show sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
Here at Four Season Farm, we use Rimmel greenhouse models to support our year-round crop production. Today's show is also brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud sponsor of the Winter Growers podcast. Since 1973, Johnny's has supported farmers and gardeners with superior seeds, tools, and information to help ensure their growing success and feed their communities and families. The research farm is the heart of Johnny's, where they trial thousands of varieties and tools every year. The breeding program uniquely focuses on introducing varieties that meet the needs or solve challenges that mixed market, small farmers, and avid gardeners face. Visit johnnyseeds.com for innovative new varieties and time-tested favorites to grow this season. You can also browse the online Growers Library for a wealth of educational resources, including the Johnny's Winter Growing Guide, which features tips on planting and harvesting into the shortest days of the year. The employee owners at Johnny's look forward to growing with you. Now, back to the show. Tell me more about your CSA. You have 90 households or members year-round, so that would be through the winter months, and then that doubles in the summer. Maybe tell me about what does a week look like for harvests? The setup for your CSA, who your customers are through the winter. What does that look like?
Well, a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago, we switched from one harvest a week to 4 harvests a week in summer and 2 harvests a week in winter, just to spread the load, because I found that it's just so strenuous if you have to do it all in one day. I mean, even if you've got storage room where you can store veg that you harvest a day early or something like that, it still just culminates all in that one day. And that just stressed me out so much. So I decided to just split it up and have the members pick it up on different days. So we've got 2, we call them depots, where we just, it's just drop-off points more or less, where we take the veg. And one is where I live, because I don't live on the farm. And one is in the next town. It's not a city, it's a town. It's not all that big. And it's just a garage, and we've got shelves in there, and we just set it up like a market, but we're not there ourselves. We just set it up and then we leave again. There's a list hanging up where it says how much every share is allowed to take this week. And there's a scale there so that they can weigh whatever it needs to be weighed. And so they just take what they're allowed to take. And we've got much less work like that. I know a lot of CSAs stay there and dish out the veg. Of course, you prevent the shareholders making mistakes, but we just add a bit of veg, and then if somebody makes this mistake, it doesn't really matter. But it's so much less work that it's definitely worth it. And in summer, we take veg to each depot twice a week, and in winter only once a week. So that spreads this workload nicely throughout the week. And it also means that when we harvest, and I think this happens quite regularly, we suddenly see all kinds of things that have to be done that you didn't see when you did your field walk on Sunday. because just new things crept up and since then. And then we finish harvest when we have our midday break, and that's it. And then we've got time. We've got all the afternoon to just fix all the other things and do all kinds of other things. And I find that very satisfying because it just lets me get the feeling that things get addressed when they need to be done. And we don't have to wait until, say, next week when we've scheduled a day for hoeing weeds or something like that. We can just hoe them right after harvesting. And yeah, that helps, especially as we've got a lot of summers where we do get a lot of rain, for example. We haven't got an arid climate, but we get rain here regularly. So we just have to organize everything around the weather much more than areas where you don't get any rain, or where you can just say, well, we're going to hoe on Tuesdays and that's what we're going to do. We can't. We have to hoe when the ground is dry and when we don't have to harvest and when there's just time and everything fits in.
Yeah. So what would you say are the biggest challenges to winter growing in particular? I mean, do you notice things that feel like they're always pushing you to figure it out, or what are generally the biggest challenges that you find in running either a CSA or just farming in general?
I think one thing is that if you don't grow during winter, you can just cover up your beds and eliminate all the weeds that are growing on there and start anew in spring. And this is something that we can't do, or can only do on part of the growing area. So wherever there's veg growing in winter, weeds just grow because it's usually so wet here that even if we hoe them, they just carry on growing afterwards. And we've got problems with annual bluegrass and chickweed because they also flower in winter and have seeds, and those seeds also ripen in winter. So that's a bit of a difficulty, I find, because I haven't really found a way to address it. Of course, we could use landscape fabric and grow through landscape fabric for the winter crops, but I don't know, that's not the way I want to grow, because for one, I don't want to have so much plastic in the garden. I mean, one still isn't quite sure about the microplastic from things like that. And studies have shown that there already is quite a lot of microplastic in the soil. That's the one thing. And then it's also, I mean, it reduces water infiltration. It increases water runoff and therefore causes problems somewhere else then, where you've got more water collecting suddenly. So that's not really a solution for me. Yeah, so I haven't really found one yet, except that we've been trying to cover beds that we're not using for winter growing, to cover them really early, as early as possible, to try and keep those clean then, because we've switched to no dig 1.5 years ago, or nearly 2 years ago now. And that means we can't just get out the power harrow in spring and just create a clean slate to start planting again. We just have to cope with the weeds somehow.
Yeah. And do you have any techniques that you've learned to deal with that effectively? What have you learned?
Well, not really anything yet. I've tried, this year I've tried mulching a bit, but when it's so wet and we've got too much organic matter on the surface, then it tends to attract slugs, especially if the winters are mild. And yeah, I think it might also be a nutrient issue, because that's always the way I try to approach, especially weeds and also pests, is to try and understand why they are there. And especially weeds, usually they're there because either the ground isn't covered enough, or they have to try and heal something, usually a condition that I created. And I haven't quite understood that yet. I mean, chickweed usually shows that there's too much excess nitrogen there. I'm not sure about annual bluegrass. I haven't found all that much information actually on annual bluegrass yet. But it seems to point into the same direction. That means that we'll have to find a way to reduce nutrient levels during winter, which isn't all that easy as it sounds.
No, especially because you have, cold soil and reduce, everything is just slowed down. So, yeah. It's hard you can't just throw a bunch of water on there and expect to flush it all out. So, yeah.
I might experiment with some undersowing of green manures just to take away that space and utilize all those excess nutrients and just store them in the cover crops. But I'm not sure that it's a bit more difficult because with all that interplanting, the window where I could actually establish some cover crops is usually very narrow, especially underneath kale and crops like that. I harvest the lettuce, and then the canopy is more or less closed, the kale canopy, and there's not enough light to establish a cover crop anymore. So what I've planned for next year is to then plant some more crops. I tried that out. Yes, this year I planted some leek in between because leeks do tend to cope with less light as long as they're still quite young. And I've also planted some parsley. I tried sowing parsley like Daniel Frith suggests in his book, but that didn't work out all that well because I think I would have had to have done more overhead irrigation for it to germinate. And then crops like kale tend to just divert the overhead irrigated water and keep them away from the parsley that is supposed to germinate. Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that technique. Does he direct sow parsley and interplant it into the brassica? Is that what you were just describing? Is that what he does?
He also does it to have more plants growing in between brassicas that have a symbiosis with mycorrhizal fungi, because to more or less not have this hunger gap for mycorrhizal fungi when you grow brassicas. So that was one of his aims with parsley. And it overwinters, and it's not all that difficult to eliminate in spring.
Yeah. And what do you do when you get to, March and there's, as many people are familiar, is considered like the hunger gap or the hungry gap, where it's difficult to have the winter over crops be producing a lot, but then you don't necessarily have the maturity in new plantings or, the warmth to grow them. How do you sort of bridge that gap, for your CSA members, for your farm?
Yeah. Well, in the polytunnel, we just crop out half of the winter greens when daylight hours start to increase again, because then they just grow so much faster. And the amount that we grow in there matches the amount that we need to harvest from the beginning of December to the middle of February. So we only cut them once in that time. And then we harvest out or cut out half of it, and the other half is more than enough to just cover our needs. And this space, then usually we grow 4 rows of, say, mustard greens on one bed, and then we take away the 2 outer rows and we plant, say, lettuce in there then. Still carry on harvesting the 2 middle rows, and until they start flowering usually they start in the middle of April, and we harvest them until then, and that's then when we crop those out, and then the lettuce is ready to be harvested. So we don't really have all that much of a gap, But what we do is that in March and April, we switch to a bi-weekly distribution of veg. So that has more to do with the storage crops not lasting. They wouldn't last us the full length of the winter because they just take up so much room in growing in the garden. I would have to expand that area even more. And I just don't want to grow more than I'm doing at the moment. Yeah, so we just, for something like 8 weeks, we only do pick up every second week. And the great thing about that is that it frees up time for us to do all the spring plantings and all the bed prep in spring. That's really a nice thing. I always look forward to that because it's just this phase in the year where we can all concentrate. Every second week, we can just concentrate on growing. We don't have to do any harvesting. We don't have to do any veg distribution. We just grow. And I love that. That's like a little holiday in between.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it sounds like you're really, you're constantly evaluating all of the systems and how they overlap and how they interfere with one another, depending on, what you have to do, whether it's harvesting or planting. And because you're a 4-season farmer, year-round farmer, that gets heightened. You have to always be anticipating what the next thing is. And that's super challenging to do and to do it well.
Yeah,
so it sounds like you're doing that, very well.
Yeah, thank you. It probably only sounds like that. It's in reality, things happen, and then you have to cope with them and readjust and get out your plan B and do all that kind of emergency work then, and just hope that everything fits in still. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about time off? Are you able to take any time off from farming? Do you get to take a vacation? Obviously it's more challenging as a year-round farmer. So are you able to fit that in?
Yeah, I do. And I need to. And otherwise I wouldn't do all of this. And really right from the start, it was very important for me to have the possibility to actually go on holiday in the summer as well. So what I do is there are 3 weeks in summer where we hardly plant anything, when nothing needs to be sown, because I like to do the sowing myself. I don't like to have employees doing that, because if I make a mistake, then it's my mistake. And you usually only see that mistake a couple of weeks later, too late most times. And so in these 3 weeks, there's only a little bit of planting to be done. All the crops that we harvest, or most of the crops that we harvest, we've been harvesting for a couple of weeks, like tomatoes and courgettes and all those summer crops. So everybody knows how to harvest. Our weekly shares, half of them is always the same, and then the other half are crops where it doesn't really matter if they harvest it this week or next, like chard, for example, or summer leeks. If they can carry on growing for another week. So it's quite flexible in what we harvest. But there's a lot of routine in there, and the team, which usually starts with me in spring, because most times it's only people that stay for 1 year. They've got enough routine as well. So that's usually in August, 3 weeks, where I've got time to leave, and I go away for, 2 of those 3 weeks and just leave the farm be. And that's great. And then when I come back, I usually can't wait to do all the crop planning for next year. And it's great. I love that. And it was so important to me. And I set out with that goal. I want to be able to have a summer vacation. Otherwise, I won't do this. And I mean, I know so many farmers who say that's not possible. And I say it is, but you do have to have a lot of management in place. But if you really want to do it, you can do it. You can manage.
Yeah. And you must do it, right? For your sanity.
Of course. Yeah. And then the week after Christmas, we don't harvest for that week, because most people Here in Germany, they just have a lot of family coming around at Christmas and have huge meals. And usually there's so much over or left over from these meals that you can eat them for another week. And that means they don't do a lot of cooking in the week after Christmas. So they don't need any fresh produce then. And we just take that week off, and all the cut and come again greens in the polytunnels, they don't mind because they aren't really growing in any case during that time. So we've got that week off, and that means everybody. I just go into the garden to feed the cats and check on the polytunnels, and that's it.
Well, good. Well, let's jump into the lightning round questions. Are you ready for those?
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay. Well, we'll start off easy here. Number one, what gets you up in the morning?
Well, I'm afraid that's the alarm clock, because I would like to lie in a bit longer. Usually I'm somebody to get up, that likes getting up a bit later. I like working at night then. I do all my office stuff at night. But in the mornings, I like sleeping on a bit. But I mean, it's probably meant a bit more metaphorically, isn't it? So
I hope your son isn't an early riser then.
No,
but is he?
No,
okay.
no, not at all. It's so terrible. Ever since he's been going to kindergarten, it's so difficult to get him out of bed because we have to be there by 9 o'clock. And that means we have to get up at a certain time. That's difficult. But otherwise it's just, I just love what I'm doing, and I find it so interesting, and there's so much to learn all the time, and so much to discover, and new things to try out, and that's what just keeps me going all the time.
Yeah. What's the hardest part of farming for you?
To stop. When I need to stop and not wait until the work has been finished, because it is never finished. It just carries on, and to find this point when something is done well enough and not to try and do it perfectly is a constant struggle for me.
Yep, I can relate. What is your favorite tool?
Oh, definitely my wheelbarrow. I love it.
Really? That's a first.
Yeah, it's lightweight. It's nicely balanced. It was really expensive, but it just helped me so much. And I just use it so much, not only for compost, but I like it for transporting harvests and all that stuff. And it's great. It's blue.
Well, who makes it, or what's the brand?
The brand is called Mefro, Mefro, and it's made in Germany, and it's really good, very good quality. And I know a lot of people that have bought one because I just love talking about it.
Well, good. You should become the spokesperson for it. What is your favorite way to relax or self-care activity? Or how do you take care of your body, heart, and mind as a farmer?
Well, I love reading and walking and riding, but ever since I'm a mum, I haven't got all that much time for all three things. So I try and fit in as much reading as possible in the evenings or at night. Unfortunately, my horse is 34 years old, so I'm not riding at the moment. And my dog is 16 and a half, so I'm not walking all that much at the moment. But that is what I like doing. And if we do get snow here, which only happens about once or twice every winter for a week or two, then I love going cross-country skiing.
That sounds great. What is your favorite smell and your least favorite smell on the farm?
I just absolutely love the smell of dill. I think it reminds me of my grandmother. She had a big kitchen garden, and she just let it go to flower every year. And that means it popped up wherever there was a bit of bare soil. And whenever I walked through that garden, it just smelled of dill. And she loved to put it into a salad dressing. And ever since I've loved it myself. Mm-hmm. And I think, the least favorite is definitely, I think it's called, in English, you call it Galensoga, that weed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's just absolutely horrible. I can still remember a practical that I did where we had so much of that stuff. In the end, we didn't hoe the onions anymore, but we took a scissor and cut that off. And I got the feeling I kept smelling of it for weeks on end. And I try and keep it out of my garden. And I just, when I do the weeding and I just happen to touch one of that, it just creates a smell immediately. It's got quite a distinct smell. And whoa, there's Galensoga. I need to get that out straight away. No flowers, don't set flowers. I think one flower has got something like 10,000 viable seeds.
Yes, yeah, I've heard that too.
And it also, these seeds can also germinate if the flower hasn't really finished flowering.
Yes, yep. It is a noxious, horrible weed. And I would advise you not to come visit Four Season Farm in August because we have a horrible problem with it.
Oh, no.
You wouldn't want to be walking around the farm.
Yeah. In German, it's called the French herb. And by the way, you can eat it.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it has all these benefits, but not for the farm.
Yeah, and in German it's called the French herb, and I think it was called that when Germany and France. I mean, there had been going wars on for hundreds of years between Germany and France, and that must have been during one of these wars where they said it's as horrible as the Frenchman. They must have called it the French herb. It's an invasion like the Frenchman.
Oh, no.
They must have called it that then during one of those wars.
Right. Oh, well, speaking of eating it, I believe there's a Colombian dish. It's like a chicken dish that you cook with the Galensoga as the green. And my stepmother, Barbara, for farm lunch will always try to do that, every year. And, we're always a little bit like, maybe we should have, spinach instead as the green. but it's cool to experiment and to try to play around with that way to prepare it.
Just like chickweed. I mean, you could eat it as well, but you don't have to.
Exactly. Okay. What do you, or how do you turn off farming, or can you?
Well, it helps that I don't live on the farm.
And
that means I travel there either by car with my e-bike and that's just like a bridge from home to farm and back again. That does help. But also just having a small child, I can't think about farming all the time. I just have to switch off when I'm home. I have to be here, look after him. And if I'm not with him, he'll make sure I am.
Good. What do you love besides farming?
I just find ecology so amazing. It's just, nature in itself. I find it so fascinating how everything works, how everything fits together, how everything. There are no leftovers in nature. There's nothing without a reason, and it's all beautiful as well. And I find that so amazing, and I always strive to imitate that in the way I farm, and just try and, for one, not to interfere all that much, and for two, to just create systems that imitate that look at the way nature does things, and just finding that out and being outside and taking part in all of that. That is what I love. And otherwise, I like flowers as well, but I always advise everybody that if you grow vegetables, don't grow flowers as a hobby. That's too similar.
What's one piece of advice you wish you had starting out, or something you wish you had done differently?
to write down my ideals, put them into an envelope and tuck them away to not forget them, and then to start farming without as many ideals as I did and just get started. It's difficult enough as it is. And if you just try and do all that, what I just said before, right from the start, you're going to make your life very difficult, which I did. And I've come to the point where I've said I have to step back on a couple of ideals. I can still try and realize them in 10 years' time. I don't have to do it all within the first 5 years.
Yes. How do you relate to that, which is out of your control?
I try and stay calm. Best thing is probably if I lie in bed here and the storm is howling around the house and I know my polytunnels are out there. And I think ever so often, should I go out and check on them? And then, well, I can't really, because I would have to go there by car and I can't leave my son here all on his own. So I just can't do anything. And just to accept that sometimes you can't do anything and that you just have to see what you can do afterwards if something has happened. And I mean, how often something doesn't happen? I mean, that's more often the case than actually something does happen. And if really something happens and I'm in the midst of it, I've got this ability, everything around me just slows down, and I can act, I can react, and I can act on what is happening, and that helps a great deal. I suppose that's like that with all human beings. I think that's set up that way so that we can cope with situations like that. But that has helped me in the past. That I know even if something really bad is happening, at least my body knows what to do.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a superpower.
Oh, definitely. I've always wanted one.
Where and how does wildness enter or influence your farming practice?
As much as possible. I always find that especially market gardens have a tendency of looking so neat and tidy everywhere. And that just keeps out so much nature that you need to actually achieve what you're trying to achieve, to grow nutrient-dense, healthy food and to grow a healthy soil. So wherever it is possible, I always say, just try and let it in, just try it out. And it's done so much good. For example, there's this grower in England. He's called Ian Tolhurst. I don't know whether you happen to know him.
No, I haven't.
Tolhurst Organic. He's been a grower for, 40 years or something like that. And he always says, if you've got a polytunnel, you need a patch of nettles in front of it to attract all the pollinators. And that is what I've been doing. And also, one thing that we've been doing now for the past couple of years is just let the kale flower in spring. And ever since we've been doing that, we haven't need to use any insect netting anymore, because it provides habitat for so many beneficials. And yeah, so I just try and open up whatever room I can leave to wildness and just let it come on its own as well. I've got strips around my garden wherever I don't need the space. I just let everything grow. I mow around it, but inside those strips, everything can just grow as it wants. And I think, wildness isn't necessarily wilderness only, but wildness also. I think that's one of the things that I also have to just. I'm a person that tries to control a lot of things, and letting things go wild also within myself is a practice within farming that I definitely lead. So, yeah, I try and let it in wherever possible.
What do you long for, and how does that influence how you farm?
Oh, I would just wish that people finally understand what agriculture is doing to our earth. And if we just carry on like this, that humankind won't be here for all that much longer, which might be a good thing in the end then. But I find that solutions are there, and I'm trying to live one of those solutions. I'm trying to be a role model in what I do and how I grow food for people, for my community. And always trying to strive for this, what I said before already, just to imitate nature, just to try and reduce my impact on nature, and to realize that we're all part of it, that we're not separate of nature, and that whatever we do to nature, we do to ourselves. And trying to explore how we can do that, what possibilities we've got as humankind to create within nature, not separate of nature. And that the past 5 years have been an absolute journey in the garden, how things have developed. When I started off there, that used to be a conventional field and with corn growing there. So there was hardly any soil structure there, probably hardly any soil life either. And we had problems with runoff and erosion, and just how fast everything has recovered and is still recovering, and how yields have just been going up and up and up, and how resilient everything has become. I find that so amazing that the potential is still there. I mean, we haven't destroyed everything, that the potential is still there. We just have to step back and take ourselves less important, and then it'll work out and everything will be fine. Actually, it's quite easy, but humans just tend to make themselves more important than they are. And that will be their downfall, or our downfall. I mean, I'm part of them, aren't I?
Finally, how will you grow old farming?
Oh, that's a question. I hope I'll grow old with dignity, and that means also not growing bigger but growing smaller, to be able to manage what I set as a goal. I mean, we tend to just set our goals too high and then be frustrated, not be able to reach them. And I think if you grow older, you just have to accept that you just have to reduce your goals a bit more. But I just hope, I don't know whether I'll still be growing on my own farm. I hope the next generation will be doing that, actually. But I will always have a garden. I've always had one. I had one when I was a child, and I hope I'll have one when I'm old. And I hope I'll be able to also grow, and until my son always says, when you die, you're put into the earth, and then you feed the plants.
And that's sweet and amazing that he sees that already.
Yeah, that's really. And a couple of days ago it has. And what do you do when you've finished feeding the plants? But I hope so. That means that in the end, I hope I keep feeding my plants right to the end, or even after my end.
Well, thank you so much, Vivian. This has been a delightful conversation, and I have loved learning more about you and your farm and all the wonderful impact that you have made already in a relatively short amount of time. So I look forward to following your journey and seeing where you go next.
Perhaps one thing more that I could say is that here in Germany, we've just founded an association for market gardeners and micro farmers, because we're getting more and more, and we're trying to put up this association. We've been having a conference since 2017 already, and the first one was with Jean-Martin Fortier, and then the year before last, it was your dad was there for an online session as well. That was absolutely great. And so we've got this association now, and we're also working together with people in Luxembourg and Switzerland and Austria, because we all speak German, so we can work together as well.
And where can people learn more about this association?
Well, it's called Kohlrabi Netzwerk. So that's hummingbird, because we're small, we're diversified, and wait, let me just think about and we're colorful. That's right. Called hummingbird.
Small,
network.
Diversified, and colorful. I like that. That's great.
Thank you. That's why we're the hummingbird network. Yeah.
Yes, I love it. Well, thank you again. It's been wonderful to have you here today.
And thank you so much. And you've been doing such great work for all these market gardeners and micro farmers. And all that in your free time. And I find it absolutely amazing. And you, and also the no-till growers with their podcast. Thank you so much. There's so much valuable information that we all have been getting from you. And I think one just can't say that too often. Thank you.
Thank you. Today's show was produced by me, Clara Coleman, with support from No-Till Growers. Special thank you to Willie Breeding for the theme music. Thank you to the patrons at patreon.com/no-till growers for helping to make this show possible.